In and beyond this moment, we will need artists and creatives to have space. And we're going to need them to help us navigate this moment and beyond with our lives, how we interpret things. And most importantly, with space being a critical need, it's about creating. It's about making, envisioning, convening, communing, and exploring, all while making sure that space helps us sustain our lives. The ongoing debate as to whether artists and creatives deserve to have access to work-live space should no longer be one, but rather it should be seen as a basic need and a human right that should be met every single day. From our barbershops, tattoo parlors, our firehouses, music recording studios, public space, artist housing, and all the supporting infrastructure in between, it is space that is critical to the future of our livable and sustainable communities for everyone. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, as you hear from our panelists, consider the moment we are in, where each of us can participate, advocate, build, piss off, and collaborate with each other. With that said, I'd like to introduce our lovely, amazing Emily Ruddock, Executive Director of MassCreative, for her open remarks. Welcome up, Emily. I got to adjust this for you.
You are the professional here. You know how to do this.
I love you dearly. All right, there you go.
Thank you, Captain.
You're welcome.
Good evening, all. How are you? Okay. So I'm going to start out with my list of thanks. Catherine, you and your team at the Boston Foundation have been integral in not just thinking about how we are spreading resources to the arts community, but really bringing folks together to think through challenges, to think about how we are going to imagine a different world. And that's the kind of leadership that we really need in this moment. So thank you, Catherine, and thank you to the TBF team. The Boston Foundation, it should be important to note, has long been a partner of MassCreative and advocates across the region moving forward a lot of this work. And so it's great to continue to be part of that conversation. Most importantly, and Madeline and your team at Zumix, thank you for hosting us this evening and for letting us be in a creative space for this conversation. Most importantly, I want to thank all of you who are sitting here, who are joining us virtually. We are in a moment, as Catherine mentioned, where the value of artists, of creatives, of culture bearers, of creative businesses is being questioned and challenged. So coming together to discuss these complex issues and collaborate on solutions is an act of resistance. Let's hold on to that tonight, okay? So my first career was in theater, and so as a theater nerd, we're gonna do a little exercise. So I want you to all close your eyes on Zoom. Close your eyes too, and I want you to imagine an artist's creative space. Whether it's a place where art is made, rehearsed, refined, exhibited, or performed. It could be a small room filled with instruments, a workshop with tools and machinery, a studio with a kiln and clay. It could have sprung floors for dancers or concrete for painters. The walls could be brick or they could be reinforced with soundproofing. It's in this space that you are imagining that ideas come to life and that something truly unique is born. But the creative process and its product doesn't stop at the walls of this workspace. It ripples out. It connects neighbors, it inspires, it ignites, it weaves together into the fabric of our communities in such a way that we often overlook these contributions because they are so deeply embedded in why we're proud to live where we live, okay? All right, so you've got your space, right? We've centered why creative space matters, right? Because as Catherine pointed out, creative spaces are the backbone of a thriving creative sector. Yet, for decades, these spaces have closed and artists are displaced due to that lovely cycle of gentrification. And let's acknowledge this. On bad days, artists contribute to that process. But on good days, when they are in solidarity with their neighbors, they are fighting for a better future together, and we shift that conversation and we shift systems. So at MassCreative, we work across the state, hearing from creatives facing workplace disclosures and displacement. This is not a Boston issue. It is a statewide issue. But thanks to reports from the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture and the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, we know that Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville are the epicenter of this space loss. In Somerville, 3 million square feet of art space are at risk of redevelopment. 45% of artists rely on informal agreements with landlords, leaving their workspaces vulnerable. In Boston, 70% of space users report that they can't find the right rehearsal space or performance spaces, and with high costs pushing many independent artists and organizations to compromise or close altogether. This is sobering data. It should spur us all to action. So we can have me get off the stage and be inspired by our panelists. But before I do, I just want to remind you that there are many ways that we're going to act, and you're going to hear and be inspired this evening and think through a lot of different strategies for doing that. One other one I just want to mention here is that on the state level, thanks to all of your contributions to our community listening process, we have a bill, a Creative Space Act bill that's sponsored by Rep. Cahill and Senator Morana. It provides tools for cities and towns to prevent the loss of artists. And so I want you to keep that in the mind tonight, that there are lots of ways we're going to attack this challenge, and we're going to figure it out together. So thank you so much. And is it my pleasure and honor? Yeah, right on. So we can get me off the stage, and I'm so delighted Anita Morrison-Mantra will be moderating the panel this evening. Thank you, Anita, for being here. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here. Really excited about this conversation. Have spent a lot of time in community with everyone except Andronika, which I'm excited to hear more from. So it's been shown time and time again that artists and creative communities can revitalize an entire city while turning underinvestment in neighborhoods, into, I'm a little nervous. Okay. Thank you. Often turning underinvested neighborhoods into vibrant and desirable cultural hubs. But threats of gentrification, real estate inflation, slow capital investment, and artist displacement almost always follows. Creative spaces and live-work units where residences are connected to professional artist workspaces are the starting points for thriving neighborhoods. From hair salons, tattoo parlors, to music recording studios and craft person shops, plus public space, artist housing, and all of the supporting infrastructure between. These assets are critical to the future of livable and sustainable communities for all. Artists and creatives deserve the opportunity to access and or remain in these areas that they have helped to define, amplify, and develop. Please join us for an important conversation with leaders and practitioners in the field who will discuss the current landscape and explore the opportunities and intersectional models we need to stabilize artist work-live spaces. Thank you. So I think let's just invite all the panelists up. Thank you. So let's take a little time these folks on the stage are very much stars, very much rock stars. But I think it's really important for us to know who you are and what organization you represent. Let's start with you, Bobby.
Yeah, my name is Bobby Boyd. I'm the executive director of the Record Co. We control two spaces. Thank you. We control two spaces, one at 960 Mass Ave, which is right next to Boston Medical Center, and another at 55 Morrissey Boulevard. The first space is an hourly space, so we have 20 bookable rooms of hourly recording and rehearsal space. The second space is part of a crisis intervention where we jumped in when the Sound Museum closed, and that is a temporary solution where we have 90 rooms of monthly rehearsal space with about 400 bands in that building.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pass it off to Joseph.
Hi, good evening. I'm Joseph Henry, the Director of Cultural Planning in the City of Boston. Been here about 6 months. Emigrated over here from London in 2023. Used to work for the Mayor of London, so spent 7 years working for the Mayor there. 3 years specifically working in Culture and Creative Industries Unit. And I also am a professor of architecture at Columbia, GSAP in New York as well.
And Janika.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. I'm gonna. Ooh, that's gonna be a problem. All right, that's all right. Andrenika Morris. I lead what we call the Put Housing First triad of organizations in Louisiana. I'm a native Louisianian. I live and work in New Orleans now, and what we are dedicated to at Put Housing First is ending housing insecurity and guaranteeing housing for all. And we believe that we can do that with a housing for all model that makes sure that the most vulnerable have these needs met, and we build a system that actually ensures that all those needs are always met.
Thank you. Marquise.
Yes. Peace, everybody. Marquise Victor, founder and executive director of Elevated Thought, an art and social justice organization based in Lawrence. So at our core, we believe that creativity is essential for human liberation, and we realize that pursuit through alternative arts-based education for youth and economic opportunities for artists of color.
Thank you. Amy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Bennitt. I'm with a volunteer grassroots nonprofit called Art Stays Here. We're committed to preventing artist displacement, either preserving places that they're in or relocating them to other places. We've started a movement in the Boston area about 5 years ago, and I'm so glad to be here with many friends and colleagues talking about space tonight.
Jim.
Hello, everybody. So Jim Grace, Arts and Business Council. I'm here tonight with my real estate hat on, but the Arts and Business Council has also volunteer lawyers for the arts. We're like the law firm for the arts. We have board training program. We have professional practice program, the business side of being a creative professional program. And we also run a fiscal sponsor program. So real estate for us is relatively new for us in the last 10 years. We own about 300 spaces right now. We've developed about 380,000 square feet of space. And so my hat here is on the side of growing and hopefully building a cultural land trust. So.
Yes.
Thank you. So let's get started. So across our country and Commonwealth, the need for creative work-live spaces is on the rise. Current work-live models for these spaces are evolving as the political, economic, and social environments of communities change. How do you define or describe what artists' work-live spaces are? And in your opinion, what and why are these types of spaces important? I'm just opening it up to anyone who wants to answer.
I can start. So we have at our 55 Morrissey Boulevard location, as I said, 400 plus bands there, but they're not just bands. There's a bunch of creatives there. There's artists there, there's painters there, there's fashion designers there, there's small businesses there. There's folks that are taking a chance on their career because if they were to go out and try to find actual storefronts, they couldn't afford it. So because of the model that we have and the generosity of our landlords, that they're able to have that opportunity to come there and try things out. I think that that creates an opportunity for artists to think, explore, and dream. That's constantly under attack. As we know, the city's growing. It's an attractive model for a lot of development, biotech firms and all that coming into the space. So it does create a lot of pressure on our creative economy, but I think every time there's this forced displacement, there's this lack of trust amongst the artist community. They have this commitment to making this city beautiful, but that same commitment isn't given to them. So I think that there's this imbalance where the artists are always trying to find out, can I stay in this city? Should I leave this city? Can I actually plant roots here? You know, I think there's just back and forth, this kind of seesaw going on. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yes, thank you, Bobby.
Yeah.
I'm going to pass it off to Marquise.
So we have a creative center that we're building. We've been in the Mill building now for over a decade, and it's been an interesting process. We're on Union Street, and right in front of us on Essex Street was the 1912 Bread and Roses strike. Some of y'all might be familiar with that. Completely changed workforce and labor in the country. So there's a deep, deep history of activism and voice and community. I don't think that was fully at the forefront of my mind when I was getting space. It was basically where's the cheapest space I could find, and we started in the Mill building in the basement. Really cool landlord there. She didn't know what to do with the space, so she threw us down there between a textile and distribution company. You know, I don't know, folks in here who were born in the 80s, y'all raise your hands, or parents in the 80s, okay. All right, y'all remember the first Ninja Turtles movie that came out? All right, y'all remember that one? You remember Shredder's like orphanage underground? That's what that shit looked like. The parents would pick up their kids and be like, yo, where's my kid going? But it was there in that really raw space that began to realize what creative-centered space for us, Elevated Thought, would look like in Lawrence. And it was really chaotic. You know, we had graffiti artists coming in there, tagging up the basement, smelling the place up. We had a youth program in there, but we really found our footing. And we evolved in that space. And I tried to get a building in the city, an unused secondary library branch. But you know, city politics. We got close, and this was right, kind of towards the time in the pandemic when we were getting a little bit more comfortable going back out. So, the spring of 2021, and you know, you can't do this on your own. But sometimes you got to project the need. If you build it, it will come. Another '90s reference, Field of Dreams, holla. So there was at this point in ET where, you know, I had.
All the references.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Very specific.
But you project a need, right? But then you got to work and listen to the creatives and young people around you, and that's what led us to really realize the vision of what Elevated Thought Space could be. Have the youth voice and the artists that were part of this process inform it so it could grow more generatively, rather than like, you know, this one person, this one vision, let's make it happen, drive my art director crazy because I would say something, he'd have to draw it out, and we build a bunch of things and it wouldn't work. So we got in this space, we're building 18,000 square feet on the top of the Mill building now. Yes. We signed a 20-year lease. Yes. And you know, in full transparency, killed me a little bit because I wanted us to have full autonomy over our building. But I think folks are gonna be talking tonight about partnerships, and it's important to find those people that they might not fully understand it, but they can give you enough where there's trust there, right? Because we can't do this without trust, right? Trusted people in trusted space generates ideas, and that's kind of how we built our space.
Thank you. And then last, Amy, again, defining artist work, live spaces, and why it's important.
So we can just go to the basic definition, the two different things. There's artist workspace, which is actually what Zumix is. There is education and learning and people practicing and taking lessons here. No one's living here, right? Okay.
Don't get her in trouble.
And most of the buildings that we're talking about, most are workspaces, whether it's a place that you go to open studios, whether it's a place where you take lessons, or whether, especially if you're in a band or a musician, where you keep your gear and you can practice loud. Workspaces. Live workspaces are an entirely different animal. It's actually housing. It's a place where artists of different practices can live and work in the same place. And there's very, very few artist live workspaces compared to the numbers of workspaces, but they do exist. And just for reference, Brick Bottom in Somerville, these are owned artist live workspaces. Midway Studios in Fort Point, there are 87 rental units for artist live workspace. And then there's smatterings all over the region, but very few and far between. And in some ways, the artist live workspace is actually part of the affordable housing movement, which is a whole different animal.
Thank you. So looking at a little bit of a different side of that, Andronika, Joseph, and Jim, given your respective work, what examples can you share about sustainable work-live spaces? Andronika.
Yeah. Okay. So the space that got me on the radar of the folks here is a space that has been built or rebuilt or revitalized to be after Hurricane Katrina. Y'all all know about Katrina, right? Okay. And so in 2005, when Hurricane Katrina, unleashed unimaginable devastation in New Orleans, there was the Andrew J. Bell Middle School that was almost 101 years old when Katrina hit. The building was 101 years old. It started out its life as a all-girls school and convent. And after years of doing that, the public school system bought it and turned it into a middle school, and it shut down after Katrina. Working with a number of partners, now it stands revitalized as live workspace for artists for about almost 70 apartments. This is an overwhelmingly affordable housing space. Every apartment, they're mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms, are affordable for people who make below the median income. It was designed with the artists of New Orleans in mind. And in a place like New Orleans where our artisan bona fides is baked into our mindset. No one thinks about New Orleans any other way other than the great music, the great food, the great culture, the place. People come there to be with its people, which doesn't happen everywhere, right? Folks go to New York. They want to be in New York, right? They want to be there. They don't necessarily want to be amongst New Yorkers. You like that? But New Orleans, people want to come to New Orleans to be with New Orleanians. So that means, though, that we have a very interesting economic relationship. It is, unfortunately, still too close to chattel slavery and the plantation economy. It is still much too close to that, right? Because our economy is largely based on tourism, and you come to New Orleans to be with its people, that means it's very dependent upon its people. And so at the same time, that means you gotta keep its people there. But do you have to keep its people housed in a way that benefits their dignity, their livelihood? Well, maybe not, because you want to keep it cheap, right? And so there's a lot of uncomfortableness, there's a lot of tension in that cycle. And so Bell was an attempt, and it was successful in many ways, for us to prioritize those folks who make New Orleans, to do something expressly for them after the horrors of Katrina, and to do something with them in mind, and to not foist upon them ideals about how they could be different or better. Just what is it that artists need? They need a place to practice, they need a place to live, those things need to be affordable and accessible, and it needs to be in their community. Bell School also has the distinction of being in what we call Greater Treme, or the 6th Ward, and a lot of you may not know this, but Treme is I think we've got this official, but it might be one of those things like Mardi Gras is really ours, except for the fact that they got started somewhere else, Mobile first. We rebuke that, even though it's true. Because Mardi Gras is ours, even though it started there first. But also Treme is the oldest community for free persons of color in the United States. And so Bell is in Greater Treme, And so again, where so much history, where so much authenticity lie, that the chance to do something for those folks and have it be driven by them was what made Bell something that we very much wanted to be a part of. I was a developer at that point. I'm an advocate now. I've had, we'll talk about this later, the ways you have to move this, because I used to be public servant, then I became a private developer, and now I'm an advocate. So, and you need that perspective is necessary, right? That partnership is really necessary. So Bell is there now. It's a really great example. I'm gonna talk a little bit more later about some of the challenges. But it's also backed by public housing. It was part of a public housing redevelopment. And so there's a lot of public subsidy in it, so that there are not any excuses for whether or not the rents will be affordable for the folks it intended to be, right? The project is designed over decades to remain and retain its affordability, so that there can't be a lot of excuses. Now, of course, right now we're in the midst of an insurance crisis that everybody is grappling with, and so we've got to also make sure we're making investments that prioritize keeping people safely and securely housed.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Jim around sustainable works live spaces.
This is the crux of my entire existence right now. For me, it's about preserving existing space. So, example, that we're working together in a building in Somerville. So, if sustainability is preserving what is, then my job is to design it backward to keep it affordable. In that case, if it's rented up and it's 100% occupied, you can use the revenue of an existing space to leverage it for debt and for philanthropy and other things. So a lot of it is, if the building is a robust, thriving arts community, which there are so many, that is almost easier to preserve than an empty building. A school, that's a much more difficult project. The project we did in Worcester is 30,000 square feet, but it took 10 years. In Lowell, it's 240,000 square feet, and it took a year because it was full. And so I have much more tools in my tool belt to preserve an existing space than the cost and time and infrastructure, tax credits, government subsidies. Those are long, involved processes that where time is not your friend. And we can talk later about how time plays a role in this conversation. But time is a factor here that I think is greatly underappreciated.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm passing it to Joseph.
I was thinking about this morning about, I was actually doing a talk yesterday with some people from Florida who'd come up to Boston to look at our cultural infrastructure. And I was then this morning realizing all the things I should have said that I didn't say. And the idea of the creative industries came out of a movement in the 90s in the UK, when the then leader of the opposition, Tony Blair, was trying to work out what is the reality of 21st century Britain. Because in the 90s, you're still only 30 or 40 years post-Second World War. You're still in the midst of lots of countries gaining independence from Britain. And what was going to be the thing that Britain could peg itself to? And they created this thing called the creative industries. And that was going to be the engine of 21st century Britain. And they basically invented a sector through language to then create what then became, or is now, probably the largest employer in the country. And I think that work what makes something sustainable is that sustained prioritization, that it's important. And I think having come from London to Boston, I'm struggling to see that arts and culture being seen as a core priority to the existence and the identity of the place, the people are in. And I think if there's a immediate project, is that work to say, not only are we preserving buildings, but preserving this being a priority. And I think that to me is the priority project is. And actually when I first came to City Hall, I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this thing, and I'm gonna do that thing, and I'm gonna do that. And I realized I have to push all carts forward at the same time. There's no time for linear work. It has to be pushed consistently, collectively, across the board, as a team of one. So I'm and which is fine, I don't mind doing that, but I think that is an example of where that advocacy and that evidence, because it is actually about evidence, when I was working in economic development in London, we were getting employment data back. There were lots of sectors who were growing in London, but in London were growing workforce. So the banking sector was growing, but it wasn't growing employment opportunities. It was just making more money for a few people. The only sector that was growing employment numbers was the creative sector. So I really think, and then we started talking to these economists who were saying, everyone is worried about blue-collar jobs in the technological disruption. No, bankers need to be wary. We're working with a bank that currently has 50,000 employees. By the end of the decade, which will be like in 4 years' time, 5 years' time, they'll have 500. So they're gonna go from 50,000 to 500 in 10 years. The only future for any economy or any city, I think, in America is pivoting to one that focuses on the creative economy as its economy. Because I do think, and this probably isn't the best message to as a city worker, to say, but Boston could easily become the San Francisco of the East Coast, where you hollow out the city, and then you see massive social challenges. And I just don't think that most people. So I'm a bit like an evangelist. It's just a type of human I've got to understand in the United States of America. But I'm very much an evangelist on this issue because I think it's really urgent. And I was saying yesterday to Phrygians, like the building is on fire, and I need to raise the alarm and put the fire out at the same time. Right. Not me personally, but I have to be part of that process. I think the sustainability issue isn't actually about the sector, it's about society at large. And people have to start getting that message.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd be very interested to hear about the impact on the local economy and or the neighborhood. Marquise, Amy, Bobby.
Can I just comment briefly?
Please.
That was important information. It sounds scary, but it's true. I think what comes with that, right, is we use this word creativity, and that's transcendent of just art making, but let's for a minute lean into the artists, right? And I think what has been this kind of ongoing pervasive issue with artists and the artist economy is it being seen as like this frivolous activity, right? And then also, art making as like this decoration. And the artists are then taken advantage of. And you see this constant distrust. Even with art-based organizations, it's very difficult sometimes to start a relationship with an artist when they've been kind of used and abused by all different types of folks across industries, and they feel like, all right, well, if I'm gonna bring my craft into this organization, y'all just gonna use me and suck me dry. Right? And there's no room or time or space for me to continue to evolve as an individual artist, right? So there's these layers, I think, that we need to address when it comes to supporting, lifting up our artists and protecting them too. And I think that's kind of this cohesion point that we have here of creating these spaces, almost like a fortress for the creatives, right? Because you mentioned data too. I think along the lines of the more qualitative sense, these storytellings and these narratives that we need to kind of, you said it, right? Collective action. We need to kind of bring these things together to present that, right? As a unified front.
And you hit the nail on the head. It's all about the economic impact. Everything in the world and everything in the United States is about the economic impact. Price of eggs, price of rent, price of anything. And our sector, Emily may snap back at me for saying this, is not really good at telling our story about our economic impact, and we have to get better at it. The MassCreative, Massachusetts Cultural Council, other entities are trying to get us enough data to tell these stories. Some people here may be familiar with Arts Boston. They did a data research project that came out in 2019. Obviously, that's dated. It was called the Arts Factor. You can check it out at artsboston.org. What it basically says, and if you haven't heard this, you're going to be blown away, that the art sector in Greater Boston has more financial impact and creates more revenue than all 4 major sports teams in Massachusetts overall. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. And all of us who work in nonprofit and all of our artist friends don't believe it. But that's why we have to get better at telling the story. Economic impact is about everything, and I'll just give you one little example. And I'll do it regarding music rehearsal anywhere. And if you don't know what music rehearsal is, usually it's like, it's not just for rock and roll, it's all different DJs, sometimes it's music recording, all different kinds of genres, ages, etc. But it's usually a building like what Bobby manages in Dorchester. There's 100 rooms, there's music all day long, all night long, all weekend long, and you know, bands are storing tens of thousands of dollars worth of gear there, first of all. Every time they go to practice, which is at least once a week, twice, sometimes maybe 3 times, they're buying gas, they're paying tolls, they're taking the T, they're paying for parking, not at Morrissey, but in other places. They might be buying beer, they're definitely buying food, they're stopping at retail stores, they might be going to a show after, they might be, just the act of practicing art, creating art, never mind all the patrons that go to performances. Think about what you spend every time you go do something. Think about what you spend to come here. And we have to do better at telling those stories. We have to do better at telling them collectively. And we need to then take those stories together to things like the State House, to our reps, to foundations, to corporations, and start using the message that if we don't own it, and what I mean by we is either artists themselves, nonprofits, mission-driven nonprofits, or some entity that can hold it as affordable artist work or live workspace in perpetuity, then we are screwed. And we have seen, how many people here actually know what Fort Point was? Told you.
I know.
Very few people. Yeah. Very few. You want to know why? Because it happened a long time ago. And the fact that the story of Fort Point, which I call the original sin of Boston artist displacement, is that we have to start telling that story. Because if we don't remember what happened, it will keep happening. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of artists used to live and work in Fort Point, which is South Boston. You might not, how many people know the seaport? Much more hands, right? Totally different thing. We have to tell the story because if we don't put things in place to prevent it, it's going to keep happening. Sorry to be negative.
Perfect. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit more about the tension. So whether at a local or state level, preserving, acquiring, or building artist work live spaces can become intense. From the complexity of state or local laws, real estate developers, and community land trust, to the pace of capital investment, artist displacement, cost of living, and budget. There often are conflicting priorities that can make the idea of work-live spaces for artists seem like a long, distant dream. So this question is for Marquise, Amy, and Bobby. The loss of space and artist displacement is real. The three of you deeply under the impact of such losses. When you reflect on the process of these spaces that you are in, what were and what remains to be some of the challenges?
Yeah, so currently we have an artist space that, again, was part of a crisis intervention when the Sound Museum closed. That was a 40-year-old rehearsal space in Alston, right? So thousands of musicians were displaced when that building went away. There were a lot of people on the sidelines waiting to see what happened, and there were only a few people that jumped in to actually do something. So that's usually the problem, is that there's usually a lot of people sitting in fluffy chairs and comfortable positions waiting to see what happens, and there's usually only a few people that are actually jumping in. Fortunately enough, we jumped in, Amy and team, Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, we jumped in and we secured a building over there, and that wasn't easy. Securing that building did or had to come with the generosity of a landlord being very willing and flexible to allow a bunch of musicians to come in, because when you bring a bunch of artists into a building, it's not something that folks think is going to be a good thing. Like, hey, you're bringing in all these musicians, there's going to be all this racket, there's going to be potential bad behavior, so on and so on. So there's all this negative connotation that comes with that. But doing that work and actually seeing, touching on some of the points that Amy made, the investment that artists are making to these spaces, it's unbelievable. I mean, I've had the privilege, we got in that building in 2023. We signed a license agreement for 2 years. We fortunately got a license extension to 2027. And now that building we're at risk of putting 500 musicians back on the street. So we're not sure what's gonna happen. But I guess going back to the investment, these artists are making significant investments into their gear, into the rooms, into their artistry. And every time they experience this displacement, they find a place, they get uprooted. They find a place, they get uprooted. It creates this lack of confidence where they start to lose belief in themselves. It becomes almost a mental health crisis where you start to think, is it worth for me to continue to do this thing, or should I just give it up after you've made all this investment? So I think it creates multiple different layers of an issue, and something that we're just not really prepared to deal with in the city. Development is coming, it's an attractive city, as I said, for all, but I think if the artists are creating or generating the kind of money that they state, 28, 27 billion, there should be some of that money allocated to make sure that artists can actually have a space, that we carve out a space, and that it's intentional.
I want to jump on that, and this is not a plug for Art Stays Here podcast, but if you go to our website, you can hear many people who are on the stage talk about specific displacement things. But what I want to say is, like, what is the impact? There's actual trauma. So Bobby just said, oh, mental health. It's actual trauma. We had one podcast conversation with artists that have been displaced multiple times. I can tell you, my husband alone, who's been a musician in the city for over 35 years, he has had 8 practice spaces. Not because he chose to switch, but because they close down, move, fall apart, etc. And there's probably many, many musicians, especially, and artists that have had many different spaces. It is traumatizing because where are you going to go? How are you going to afford it? Where are you going to put your gear? And all of the messages that are being sent to you is that the city doesn't care, the community doesn't care. Why isn't anyone doing anything? Why doesn't anyone appreciate all of the work that we're doing? Mm-hmm. And the only answer I have is that as a community, we haven't done enough advocacy to the people that matter to change the tide. And as soon as the musicians and artists start speaking up, the tide does change. And the elected officials and funders and so on and so forth, it does work. So, but I'm telling you that, like, there are people that sat in that podcast saying that, like, they're on medication, they have been hospitalized, they don't even know that they can go on creating music or art, or in some cases running a music venue, because there's no pathway. So, like, what do you do when you run a venue for 20 years and it closes? How do you get to the next one? What do you do if you cannot afford, or at one point over the past few years, there is no space to go? There's waiting lists, 50 people deep. You leave the city. So how many people are going to Lawrence, Haverhill, Lowell? How many people are going to Pawtucket? How many people are going to Manchester, New Hampshire? People are saying to us all the time, I don't know if I can stay in Somerville, Cambridge, Boston, or even the metro area. So the more we come together, the more we talk about this, and the more that people like all of us come up with creative solutions, we can turn that ship around. And Jim Grace and the Arts and Business Council has done it. The Record Co. has done it. MOAC has helped us. You're doing it in Lowell. The tide is changing, and we need help. We need everyone involved. And Jim Grace and Arts and Business Council and Art Stays Here right now are partnering with the city of Somerville to save Central Street Studios, which is in Somerville. If you haven't been getting 10 emails from me today, you'll get them tomorrow.
You will tomorrow. Trust me.
Please check it out. You can give $5. You can share our social media. You can give an auction item. And there's a $100,000 deficit to save that space. That's not very much. If every person gives $5, we can save the space. Jim has put together an amazing creative financing package. The owners are willing to sell it not to a commercial developer, but to a mission-driven nonprofit. The artists are doing a fundraiser. But did you even know? No. Do you read the Boston Globe? Do you listen to WBUR? Do you read Cambridge Day? It's all out there. Please go and do your part. Help keep space in Greater Boston. And one thing, is there anyone from MAPC here? I don't see anyone tonight, but as Emily mentioned, Metropolitan Area Planning Council, they do a lot of research work, in policy and in kind of how we got here and what to do. They created this report called the Somerville Artist Risk Assessment, which was referenced earlier. If you look at the map in it, every single artist building is red because none of them are owned by a mission-driven thing or the artist or a city. Every single thing is at risk. We have to change that.
Could you talk a little bit about the partnerships that are needed to ensure that you can work on that issue? Which
Yep.
partners you need at the table? Jim?
Yeah, for me, it's usually the owner. Yeah, the owner is a key, like, this is you're making a dish, the secret sauce is usually the owner, because they can give you time to put together a collaboration. It just takes longer to collaborate than it does if you just have access to capital. And so, we've lost, I think, 3 buildings in the last 18 months because we didn't have ready access to capital as compared to a for-profit developer. I mean, it happens fast. I mean, a building comes up for sale, you have to be ready to close in 3 to 4 months. It may take groups like ours many months to put a coalition together, talk to funders, boards, so. Cities. So I think, again, going back to the idea of time, if you can buy time, however you can buy time, that is a strategy in and of itself. And for me, it's always a relationship with the owner,
And then
for good or
Marquise.
bad, quite frankly.
Thank you. And then Marquise, around the new site that you're building, what type of partnerships did you need to solidify in order to be able to do that?
I think this kind of connects to the previous question. I think the most important partnerships for Elevated Thought is with the artists, because the part of the issue with displacement that I've seen in Lawrence is not so much a lack of space, but a lack of opportunity, the lack of creative jobs. So I think between 2013 and 2019, there was like this mass exodus of artists and thinkers and educators because there was just no opportunity left in the city. So when thinking about, what this creative center is gonna be, it was like, how do we provide opportunities, like sustainable opportunities for creatives that can stabilize them, while at the same time kind of destigmatizing this concept of the starving artists. You know what I mean? Because you live in a traditional community like Lawrence, all these, the vast majority of the young people in our program are emerging artists. Their families are like, you want to be a what? Mm-mm. You know what I mean? Like, you want to be poor your whole life, right? So I've been really intent on kind of creating our own reality, and kind of modeling what this could look like. So, all of our full-time teaching artists, they're practicing artists that have time and space outside. So our young people are able to see like, oh, they have a full-time job and they're creating, right? And how do we continue collectively to build this space? So when I think about partnership, yes, there's folks in here who have incredible capacity to build partnerships citywide, statewide, but I always go really internal first. The partnership with the creatives and the artists is most important.
Thank you. Amy, you're leading efforts with Art Stays Here, a volunteer-based coalition that focuses on navigating solutions with landlords, artist tenants, et cetera, to minimize displacement. What are the challenges or tensions that your organization has experienced for yourself and others?
Ironically, one of the biggest tensions is having the artists or musicians or whoever the tenants are actually trust us, who are volunteers, to advocate on their behalf. It continues to be a huge challenge. Other challenges are that within the funding landscape, whether government, foundation, or otherwise, there is very little money earmarked towards space. There's a few things, but most grant money is for programs. Another thing is that there just isn't enough policy, municipally or on the state level, to prevent any of this stuff or to deal with it when there's a crisis. So for Art Stays Here, we've been called in over the past few years to 12 to 15 different displacement projects. And I don't mean one or two artists, I mean buildings. And not just in Greater Boston, but in New Bedford and in East Hampton. As far west as East Hampton, there is artist displacement, and there are no tools. The tools that we have is to gather the communities and the artists to advocate to funders, to work with the media, to work with nonprofits like Jim or the Record Co. And in every hair on fire solution that we've tried to deal with, it's actually a giant partnership. I appreciate what you're saying about the artists, and that's a little bit different in Lawrence where there is more space. Every one of our interventions involves a municipality, a city. It involves a nonprofit. It involves the artists. It involves advocates like us, and in some case, a developer. Bill Hardy, who is with a company called New Atlantic Development, not here tonight, but a partner to many, has saved many artist spaces across Greater Boston. It's crazy to think that there's actually a for-profit developer that cares about artist space, but there are. And trust is, and it takes a very, very long time. Humphrey Street Studios in Dorchester, which we helped preserve over the last 5 years, that took over 3.5 years of advocacy work for it to happen. As Jim has pointed out, the Lowell thing, Western Avenue, if you haven't been to Western Avenue Studios in Lowell, you're missing out. You can go there every first Saturday for open studios. It's one of the best artist buildings I've ever been to. But it worked because it was already tenant leased up. And you know, even though the Record Co. totally heroically built out a space in Dorchester to take all these Brighton musicians short term, guess what? In 2 years, they're all gonna be displaced again. So, you know, there are so many challenges here, and it would be so great if funders could come to the table, if legislators could come to the table. What has worked for us is everyone at the table saying, what can we all bring, and how can we solve it together? So thank you for the Boston Foundation and everyone for bringing this group of people together, because we're all doing it together. And we hope you join us.
Can I pick up on one point?
Please.
So the irony of London is we don't have an arts team in the mayor's office. When the mayor came in, he was like, I'm not doing art. We have the Tate, we have the Serpentine, let them do art. We're the government. We should be doing capital infrastructure investment. So we actually don't have a program, but like we have a very small program budget in the mayor's office. Every single thing that we delivered was delivered through economic development funding for capital infrastructure. Because the idea was that once you invest in the infrastructure, the revenues get generated off the back of that. Our gearing of investment in Boston, and I think there's gonna be a lot of hard conversations to be had about where the priorities lie. And really, and the other thing that is super different is there's like so many nonprofits here. And I think that's also something that we're gonna have to like think carefully about, which is how do these organizations maybe merge, partner, come together with shared missions, and then we can support the infrastructure building around that. Because I don't think you can have 50,000 art nonprofits in a state of 7 million people. I just think there's gonna have to be a little bit of like difficult decision, and those difficult decisions are being forced. So I think, do you make difficult decisions with agency, or do you do it when you're really struggling? And I think when I look back on what we had as policy infrastructure in London, we had a culture risk office of 4 full-time staff. All they did was work with organizations at risk of displacement. We had, on less money than we have in the city of Boston, by the way. The mayor's office in London has a $20 billion a year operating budget that serves 10 million people. The city of Boston has a $5 billion a year operating budget for 700,000 people. This is not a poor city. So that's the thing, that when people say, oh, there's no money, you have way more money than we had in London. I think there's also a moment where caring isn't enough. You can't just care, you have to know what to do. You know?
Right. That's right.
Like
Yes.
Sorry, this is, but I hope my doctor cares for me, but I hope they're qualified. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And like, just to bring back a 90s reference, there's a moment in Jurassic Park where the velociraptor works out how to open the door.
Yes.
That's clever.
That's the moment of evolution that we're still trying to get to. Like, we need the city of Boston to be that velociraptor that works out where the door handle is and how to open it.
Yes.
And I think that is like the job.
Yeah, that trumps my reference. My daughter just saw that a few weeks ago for the first time. We thought she was ready. In that scene, she not opening the door.
Thank you for that. So this brings us to a really good place. So as we all know, data plays a critical role in understanding the benefits of artwork, lived spaces, and potentially used to advocate for systems change to protect these spaces. In your leadership role at the city level, what do you believe is the role of government in the arts and culture and work lived spaces?
I think it's infrastructural. I think I was at the ICA maybe a couple of months ago, and there was this book on the couch, and I can't remember what it was called, but it had a Latin title. And about 22 years ago, the ICA, when it was back before it moved into its building, did this massive public art program across Boston, and they brought in world-class artists, local artists, and sort of did all these installations across the city. And it was doing immersive tech public art in like 1997 to 2001. And I was like, where is that now? And I really think the role of government right now is to really focus on where it can have most impact. And I'm super passionate about this, and I don't think we shouldn't be curators. We shouldn't have a curatorial perspective. Totally. We should be like evidence-based, research-based, tooling people up with advocacy tools, with data storytelling access. And I think we really need to say, where is our investment going to deliver the most? And there's some things I just can't even talk about because they're like very politically sensitive. But I've been working on a policy agenda where I want to take the city. But the reality is that if people from the outside advocate for this, it'll be more likely to happen than if I present it internally. And I do think that what is really important is that we think about the adjacent spaces of power where arts and culture. So I spent 2 hours yesterday with our property tax assessing team to understand exactly how it works. So there's a big difference if we as a city give someone a condo space on December the 30th or June the 30th, there's a $30,000 or $20,000 difference in tax obligations, because the city the state mandates are very specific. So we shouldn't be transferring assets other than on June the 30th. But we need them to know that you have to fill out a tax abatement. Arts and culture organizations need to understand, or we who are advocating for the sector need to understand the tools at our disposal beyond knowing who is a cool artist. That we need to help people to navigate these barriers. And Boston's a super difficult place to do this. Like, the rules and regulations in this city are insane. And I'm like, the most stiff British people came here and founded your state, for sure. And I am so glad they're not in the UK right now. Because we would not have done any of this stuff. There are so many, but we need to understand like how this works. We need to understand like the role of ISD, fire safety. We as cultural workers need to train ourselves up on the role of zoning in this. We have arts and culture, creative enterprise doesn't exist in Boston zoning rules. We need to change that. We have actually a % for art program, which is amazing, but it's limited only to the production of public art. If you're in LA, if you're in San Francisco, if you're in New York, those dollars could be used to build infrastructure. We need to move to our policy initiative, and what's really important is that Boston thinks of itself as the leading city, and on this issue, we're falling behind. And I think if Boston has one thing that it really is proud of, it's like we're the first public school, we're the first this. We should be the first city to really innovate on arts and culture, zoning, and investment.
Thank you, Joseph. And Janika, what are the possibilities of data collection informing your work moving forward?
So one of the things that has to happen is it's been really enjoyable to listen to folks talk about this. There's a lot of triggering moments, unfortunately, from our time, not just post-Katrina, but just in the history of New Orleans. And we always like talking to folks about what we've gone through, not because we want you feel sorry for us, is that we desperately hope you don't repeat our mistakes. And sorry I wasn't here sooner. 'Cause sorry, I mean, yeah, y'all have already gone down some bad roads already, and it's unfortunate, but it is. But you are where you are, and again, this is not very different than a lot of other places. So much of this is an American problem about how we think about the rules of property, and going back to those founding documents. Let's all remember, this is one of the reasons why we talk about housing and we say put housing first, is because we know that ownership of property and being a white man who owned property was the test of citizenship. Forget about enslaved Africans, forget about indigenous folks, women, forget about it. But also white men who did not own property were not a part of the grand experiment when this country was founded. And so we spent the last couple hundred years shifting the goalpost on that and moving it around. It's still a test of whether or not you are worthy, and whether or not you're valid. And of course, then you get to the economic component, right? The starving artist concept. That's just another way of othering. Othering people, and then it gets at the heart of our biases around the concept of affordable housing, right? How many of you know NIMBYs, maybe NIMBYs yourself, not in my backyard, folks, or you may be sitting here tonight, and you're like, yeah, but then when you find out that the artist, the Live Work project that is coming to you, a neighborhood near you has Section 8 in it, and you're like, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want those people there. We're fine with artists who are just struggling, and we want to infantilize in a lot of ways, and also simultaneously fetishizing them, right? Are you really ready for folks to be a part of your community? And in order for that to work, they've actually got to have and wield power. That's the thing that's missing in a lot of our communities when we talk about this, is control. And the voices and community does have power, but are there systems that allow them to wield it? And are we going to spend a lot of time fighting with each other because we're scrapping over the little bit of it? So the data is incredibly important, right? Some basic information about how many people are cost burdened. How many people even understand what affordable housing actually is, right? People might know affordable housing programs, but affordable housing is something everyone should have, because it means you're not spending more than you can afford on your housing. And if you spend more than you can afford, you can't do other things, like eat, or rent practice space, or put clothes on your back and take care of your children and get on transit to a gig or to a job or to educational opportunities. That's one of the reasons why it's such a big piece. And if people are traumatized by that lack, it makes it impossible for them to be really productive. But instead of making sure that they have that, we again start looking for reasons why, because most of us are living paycheck to paycheck, and we don't want to deal with that inequity. We'd rather blame these folks for them. And artists, culture bearers, as we refer to them in New Orleans, are handy scapegoats, because we want to like what they're doing. It's particularly those of us with no artistic skill or gift. There's envy, right? These folks create such beautiful, thought-provoking, sometimes in bad ways, just they move us. And sometimes we're jealous of that. So how do we put them in a little box so that we can just access them when we feel like it? God forbid they actually have something to say, and they actually make decisions about their lives. And so the data that needs to be collected is, exactly as Joseph was saying, what is broken, what's in the way, who needs what, how much money y'all actually have, where is it being spent, and who is in control of making those decisions, and when are the opportunities to show up with a plan. This is something we did post-Katrina. We did a lot of community planning. There also needs to be real power mapping and the intention of building and wielding power, not just a bunch of nonprofits coming in to pimp people so that they can get access to community leaders and get some grants to keep on the nonprofit industrial complex hamster wheel, right? Real talk.
I didn't say them.
You didn't say that, but you said the number of 50,000.
Yeah, facts.
You said the
Well,
fact.
46,000, yeah.
And that doesn't mean all those people are bad actors or anything like that. It just means it doesn't make any, it's not working. It's not working. So the data tells you all of that, and you've got to let the data guide you to make better decisions and show up in a way that's meaningful and impactful.
Thank you. So we have one last final combo question that I'd like to hear a little bit from everyone if possible, if we have enough time. What can artists, creatives, government, philanthropy, and the private sector do differently around support for more artists live live spaces? What do each of you believe are the best conditions needed for artists' work live spaces to have permanence and staying power?
I think Jim touched on that earlier, is just having active landlords, people that are willing to come to the table and address these challenges head on. Or, you know, maybe this was hidden in some of the conversation here, but having some of the opportunity for folks to come in the city and create infrastructure tied to making sure that artist space is preserved. I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to make sure that, you know, these don't become like, these challenges don't become so much that we already have artists that are coming from Berkeley, New England Conservatory, that are graduating with degrees, and then they find that once they get this piece of paper, they have no industry. There's nothing for them to do. So now we have, you know, even in my building, I'm sure as we're talking, you know, most of these artists or artist spaces have similar situations. These artists are just struggling to find out if they can stay in the city. The average artist in the city makes less than $50,000. So artists are, you know, struggling artists, but artists are truly struggling to find economy here. And when we have these opportunities where they can build themselves and develop, the fact that we aren't trying to create more opportunity for them it's almost turning our back to them. And I think, you know, the artist deserves more than that. They deserve more opportunity. We're not creating those opportunities. I get calls all the time for booking artists, and people are like, "Can I give them 200 or 300?" I'm like, "You're not willing to pay them enough. I don't want to take the phone call." So making sure that artists get paid fairly, making sure that there's real opportunities for artists, is something that's really important to me. But I think, you know, there's a lot that we can do. I'm sure I don't want to open a Pandora's box here, but there's a lot that we can do. I just hope that we stop sitting on our silos and our fluffy chairs talking about it, and that we put more action on the table.
That's right.
Anyone else? Thank you, Bobby.
Yeah, we need cultural trust.
Yeah, I would say a piece of, just an ingredient, because this is a complex, layered system that's been 40 years in the making, but access to affordable capital is a fundamental problem, because you can work all these deals, and at the end of the day, you know, there just needs capital, and it has to be affordable, and it has to be ready. So if it's, so ready being it has to be in time with the deal, because you have to have all your money at the deal at the day of closing. So there's slow capital and there's fast capital, and there is capital there, but the cost of capital and the speed at which you can get it does make these deals much harder structurally, system-wise. So one of the things we've all talked about many times is a kind of an equity acquisition fund that could be kind of ready to go when different groups need it. So let's take Bobby, for example. You know, at a point, if they find a building, having the ability to have the equity portion of the acquisition, not the debt, they can afford, they pay rent. In Lowell, I got financing because I could prove that artists paid their rent at a greater percentage than most of the commercial that I was competing against. So it was like 0.1%. So I was able to get 87% debt on a building because I could prove I could pay it back. The economics of your spaces work.
Absolutely.
It's the equity portion that is the problem, not the debt portion. So this idea of an equity fund is an interesting way to think about it as a tool for projects that are coming down. If you give Joseph time, then you can put together in some capital. There's some really wonderful opportunities out there right now. And the commercial market is at a dip. So we are seeing there was pigs at the trough for years, and now there's a, you know, Yeah.
The pigs on the barbecue.
There's pigs the pigs are getting resolved.
Well, and just to be clear, what Jim means by a cultural land trust, does anyone here know what a community land trust is, which is mostly for affordable housing?
Yeah, or even open space. Think of trustees of the
Right.
reservation.
Y'all don't know about Dudley?
You know, like think of
Right.
that. Yeah.
So,
I was about to say, like, this is Boston. Y'all don't know about Dudley?
Yeah. There's so many things.
okay. So
have
they exist in housing.
Many flavors of them,
Yes.
actually. Yeah.
And we're trying to do the exact same thing in Massachusetts, either statewide or city by city, where there's money put aside that when opportunities become available, you can quickly access it.
Right.
A lot of it is about the quickness. And one thing that I wanted to also mention is zoning. We haven't talked about that tonight, and that could be a whole other conversation, but I just want to give one example. The city of Somerville is, people may not know this, it's almost like this little arts hero of a city. And not just because they did this great art risk assessment, not just because they have 7 active artist buildings right now. They have one of the biggest open studios, over 350 artists in one city, the biggest porch fest, I think, in all of Massachusetts. But they created zoning to protect artist buildings. They created this thing called the Fabrication District. I won't go into all the details except to say that in Somerville right now, we have a giant advocacy fight that we're winning because the city actually put zoning in place to help artist spaces not be enticed for redevelopment. And if we take all of the tools, whether it's a land trust or zoning or data or partnership, this is solvable. We don't need 500 artist buildings across Massachusetts. We might need 100. But that's doable. They exist. Cities are sitting on empty buildings right now. Does anyone here know what's going on in Fitchburg?
Yeah, great example.
Fitchburg Artist Community, look it up. It's in the Globe last week. They chose to take empty buildings, turn them into artist housing, because they know people will come if there's things to do. It's the exact opposite thing that we have in Greater Boston. They have empty space. They're choosing the arts will bring people. But those apartments are going to be affordable for artists in perpetuity. They're not going to get kicked
In
out.
partnership with the local museum.
The local museum, their cultural CDC, the Fitchburg State College or University, and they have an economic collab. What is that thing called? Or like there's people bringing it all together. So we
Coalition?
Yes. Sorry. It's doable. Everyone needs to come together.
There's lots of ironies in this as well. Our team in London set up the Creative Land Trust of London, and it was a 3-way shared investment between the Arts Council, the Mayor of London, and Bloomberg Philanthropies. And the irony is that Bloomberg is from Medford. So you have a Boston native who is funding cultural infrastructure in London. Bloomberg Philanthropies just gave the Museum of London the largest ever capital grant award in the history of the organization. There are people who are willing to invest in it. We as a city, my job is to do my job, is to deliver stuff. That I go back into the archives. Someone had an idea for a creative land trust in Boston in 2005. We have currently got a program to turn downtown to a creative enterprise zone. That was first explored in 1984. There have been plenty of ideas, but now is the moment where you have to implement them.
That's right.
And it's going to require everyone to do it. And I think the important thing is everyone's labor in creativity is important. And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough, which is that you can't have a theatre about the porter. You can't have a theatre without security. You can't have a theatre experience of the way that this public transport works in the city without Uber drivers and like all sorts of people of the economy to sustain this. So it really is everyone's involved, but some people have more power and responsibility and accountability therefore than others. And I think this is again something that needs to be spoken about, is who is accountable when things aren't delivered.
Yes.
And if I don't deliver what I say, then I should be held accountable. That's an important part of it.
I want to ask one question before Anita closes out. At the end of our podcast, we always ask our guests the same question. Whose job is this? And the question, whose job is it to preserve, help, buy, manage, operate, fund creative space? So whose job is it?
everybody.
Sure.
Anyone want to give their opinion? That's right. Who said it? Great. It's everyone's job. Until there's policy and protection in place, it's everyone's job. Maybe if there's policy and protection in place, like for housing, then it can be different. It's everyone's job. Every single person sitting here is getting an email tomorrow about helping Somerville. Throw your $5 down. It'll work. And then the next time one of you or your friend or your neighbor or your husband or your kid is getting displaced from an artist space, you call us and we'll all help you too.
Thank you. So we're gonna take a little time to open it up for questions. I think there should be a couple of folks going around with microphones.
Hi, thank you so much. Is this working?
No.
Crisp lettuce. Nope. Can you turn the volume up on this one, please? A little bit. Thank you. Maybe.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Christina Chan. I'm a playwright and a co-founder of the Asian American Playwright Collective. Where can we get the data for the what creative economy creates? Where is that data that we can access? Because if there's development, let's say in Chinatown, if suppose there was an idea for a theater there, and if we were to approach a developer, where can we give that data to say, we can create more of an economy than, let's say, a hotel, or let's say a restaurant? Where can I get that information? I think that's one of the things that I'm coming again, so I can access it and give it to other people, and that they can spread it around, or I can use it as a appeal to a funder, or for this idea that we're thinking of.
So if you go to the Massachusetts Cultural Council website, there's some data, recent data there.
Mm-hmm.
Also at artsboston.org is something called the Arts Factor.
Mm-hmm.
If you Google economic data for arts in Massachusetts, those things will come up.
And what's the years for those?
Oh, and New England Foundation for the Arts.
And New England, okay, what's the years for those data?
I believe the Massachusetts Cultural Council is very recent in the last year.
Mhm.
Arts Boston was 2019, and I'm not sure about NEFA's.
Okay, within the past 3 years at least.
Yep.
Good. Okay, thank you.
I've also commissioned, the City of Boston launched a comprehensive creative economy and cultural industry study in 2005. There was a update in 2017, and I've commissioned a comprehensive study on the state of the sector, where it is now and where it's going to go. Because if we do start building infrastructure, these things won't come online for a couple of years. The economy will shift. So the other report I've commissioned is a report called Future Work is Creative Work, which is going to give me 100-year speculation of the creative economy in Boston to argue about where a lot of the development projects have a 20-year time horizon. We need to be aware of what's happening in 20 years and what production and cultural production is going to be. I met with a circus community group yesterday, and they were telling me that one of the way that circus performers earn money is by doing motion capture. So people like Pixar will hire all these different acrobats to capture the body to then, we should have a motion capture studio in Boston. We should be doing these things. And actually what I really want is some specificity where we say, actually Boston is the inventor and the creator of art and technology as a sector. It should be the leading city for that. It currently isn't, but we can get there again. And that specificity then will drive a supply chain. So that's what they're going to do. So I think it's about where we are now, but also where we're going to go with that data as well. So I'm trying to, hopefully those things will come online in the next 6 months, but it's government, so if you don't hear from me, show up on the 8th floor at City Hall, and come down to the data people with me, and we'll sort it out.
I love that. The data right now, and then the vision. I love
City
it.
Hall is also a public building. You can come here and berate us. This is part of our civic duty is constituents coming in and being where is my artist studio? That is actually part of the democratic process. It's not just voting, it's actually
Eighth floor, City Hall.
Yeah, 802.
802.
I must say, I used to work on the 8th floor of City Hall in that department, and people do show up.
Yeah.
So, and we want to hear from you. And when I was there, I wanted to hear from you. So, and next question.
So Joseph, I'm thinking about how Amy was describing, it's not just Boston, it's Cambridge, it's Somerville, and then you're also describing art and technology, and of course there's Wentworth, but there's MIT right across the river. What are the mechanisms where you can collaborate with other cities? Like, I know Emily thinks statewide, right? But I always feel like there are these barriers between what happens in City Hall stays in City Hall, and then what happens in that City Hall. So is there anything that can relieve any barriers to get better collaboration going?
So I can actually, sorry that I'm being a hog here. MAPC, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, is in the middle of finishing a 3 cities regional research and report for Cambridge, Somerville, and Boston that looks at zoning, that looks at land trust, that looks at all of these aspects. The report isn't out yet, but it will be in the next quarter. So that's like on our research side. That's definitely, you're asking though about partnerships and other things and higher ed. I mean, something that we actually haven't mentioned tonight is higher ed in general, right? In terms of being at the table. We have Mass Art, we have Berkeley, it's been mentioned tonight, as well as MIT and lots of other colleges. They're turning out all kinds of artists and creative people who can't afford to stay. So someone, I don't know if that's higher ed's problem. If they're part of everyone, then it is. But I think, Joseph, you actually have so many ideas on creative partnerships that's a great idea in terms of how can we share resources. So what's also interesting about arts and technology is that we have a development in Somerville right now that came in proposed as tough tech, green tech, climate tech, how to save climate for the future. It is now going to be called Arts and Innovation District because arts is going to live there and technology. So we can all start spreading that around.
Also, the geography of Greater Boston is like a third of the size of London. Like, this isn't like Tokyo or Istanbul, do you know what I mean? It's like you can drive across in 20 minutes. Like, so. Maybe. I'm from London, so, you know, everyone here gets so confused with roundabouts. I just like zip through. I know Michael, who's the cultural planner for Somerville. I know Claudia, who's the cultural planner from Cambridge. We're trying to create like a sad poet society cocktail group for like emotional support. But then, you know, I want to copy Michael's policy in Somerville. He'll be generous enough to help me figure out how to do that. Claudia's doing amazing work that intersects climate justice and arts justice. I'm going to copy what she's doing. But I don't think we have time to invent something from scratch just because we're the city of Boston. If people are doing great stuff in our neighborhood, we should be working with them and copying them. It's very easy.
Can I also say, depending on where you are, there's different, again, I'm the classic, the answer is money. What's the question? You know, so as you move out where there is more philanthropy and there is also access to capital again in communities and how quickly they can gather the resources to acquire the space, even if it's less expensive. There's a great report called The Myth of the $1 Building, that just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's inexpensive in the end. Right? So there is this kind of like, oh, it's an hour away and it's only $10,000, but you still got to fix it up. You got to populate it. It's got to be affordable at the end. It's got to be safe. It's got to be accessible. You know, so money is still part of the problem as you go to any location. How quickly those communities can access it is still part of the equation that we talk about all the time. So.
We can take 2 more questions. In front.
Hi, thank you guys for being in this wonderful East Boston space. Thank you, Madeline, for inviting us all. For Zumix. I'm Tanya, and I work with the East Boston CDC, and have been like in and around the intersection of arts and affordable housing for a long time. So I will keep my question short because I really am interested in hearing from this panel about the future and whether we should keep at the idea of combined live workspaces, specifically affordable, or are you guys finding easier paths to success in preserving the workspaces and then, you know, creating affordable spaces for artists? And, yeah, anything you want to say on that topic?
That is a giant question. Wow.
I will take a pass at it. I think one of the things that you have to do is you really need the data to talk about what the needs actually are, right? And the long-term economic analysis is incredibly important. The world doesn't function the way that it is, and we've got to start having some really frank, drill-down real estate conversations, right? The concept that Americans have about real estate is ass backwards, and it's not how it works anymore, right? People looking for valuation more people are looking to increase value off of nothing. Like everything from insurance to airplanes, you name it, there's a desire to do that. And real estate has been going back, yo-yoing that for quite some time. And now we're at the place, especially when you think about how we move to get goods and services, right? The day of traditional retail is probably done in the conventional sense. So how does a building make money? Because it needs to bring in money to support its basic functions, to make sure that it can exist for its lifetime and affect repairs. So what brings in money, and what's the biggest need, and how do you balance all of that in a healthy community? So you've got to start there. And so live work can look a lot of different ways. One of the big things that happened with Bell School, and Bell School, that is still a wound in the community, there was a desire to do many, many things in that space, including, because one of our big culture touchstones in New Orleans is food. So, you know, beyond the music and the practice space and these big lofts, they're big for what we were charging, you know, these nice-sized lofts where people could work if they were a visual medium artist. They could do different things and they could practice downstairs. They also wanted to do a commercial community kitchen. So people who had catering businesses could come in, and then the numbers started not working. And the community's pushing to say, this is something that we really need, and they've raised money for it to put it into the building, and the developers are going, that space that we need to activate in a different way. And it's still, you know, and the developers made the final decision, and many community members are still ticked about it. And so you've got to be able to talk about who wields the power so that you can be held accountable. And you've got to have some math to go along with it. And then stand up and say, we could not do this. Where are we going to meet this need somewhere else? Because this building could not take every need this community has. What's the next building? What's the next building? And as you look in communities where there's disinvestment, people are looking for, sometimes, I heard the comment made earlier that sometimes artists can aid in gentrification, right? And making a neighborhood chic and hip, and as opposed to, you know, it really being, and pushing out the very people who add that value. So at the same time, you've got to think about that as well. You've got to talk about, you got to have the math, you got to have the numbers, the buildings have to make sense, and then people have to understand if you want X and Y comes at a cost, and you've got to be ready to do that. And if you're standing up and going, well, we don't want to zone make our buildings, our communities overly dense. We don't want to zone, and people use code words, and people start screaming about parking and all these other things that are proxies for, I don't want those poor people near me. And you got to be able to have those honest conversations and say the math requires, like, you want this cute little bistro here, the workers need to be close by. If you want a museum space that's going to be cheap and only you maybe see 20 people a day, that building's got to make sense. It's got to make monetary sense long term. And housing can help with that, but not if you only have a vision of who you want living there. In your mind, you're so stuck to that you can't move past it.
That's also the difference in here in the UK. So when I was growing up in London, we still had empty plots from Second World War damage. So the city was massively ruptured through that process, which meant And then the local councils went on a massive social housing building where they put them wherever the space was. So you end up these mixed neighborhoods of people living together. Obviously, like I hope the Canadians don't go really wild after this tariff stuff. But cities need the ability to renovate themselves without everyone screaming about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I think it's so interesting because Boston is like, we're such an old city. I'm British. 400 years is nothing. Give me 1,000 years and then I'll be interested. And actually, this is actually a young city. And it's the thing that inspires me most about America is how young it is. And therefore, I feel like the culture isn't baked yet. Doesn't have to, the way it's been doesn't have to go. It's not like in the UK where we have a monarchy and all these ridiculous things which really bake in a certain behavior. Things are up for grabs here. And I actually think that there are so many models, and this is a much freer place to test ideas than the UK is for that reason. And I actually think that's an optimistic approach view I have here. And then we try to build artist housing in London. You can't actually build live work. In the UK, there's no planning. You can't do it as a zoning thing. People can do it illegally. Yeah, but so we built a project called House for Artists, and the model was that it was purely social, so it was council housing, where there was an artist preference, but the artist had to be on the housing register anyway. So they weren't wealthy people. They were people who already had housing needs, either care needs, they were refugees originally, or they were all people that would needed housing. But we then argued that artists had a special need for access to studio space. But the studio space wasn't in their apartment, it was on the ground floor. And then we also built a community center as well. What was interesting is when we were talking about this project, this took 6 years to build, it was a nightmare. But then it won an award for Best Public Housing Project of the Year, and it got nominated for the Sterling Prize. If you know what that is, it's the first time a mayoral funded project had been nominated for the Sterling Prize. It was a really big deal, really important for us. But the model that it didn't displace other low-paid workers was really important to us. And then actually we've funded a post-occupancy evaluation really for the Arts Council to look at whether this project is causing gentrification, because we're so concerned about it. But so far, what I'm hearing is that because the artists are of that community, people always assume that artists are aliens that come from elsewhere, but a lot of the time they're of the community. They're not from, they can be from here too. And I think that's the bit that was really inspiring. When we looked at all the applications, every single person who is an artist in this building probably lived within 3 to 4 miles of where, which in London is close, 3 to 4 miles of that where the building was built, and all of them had housing need. And I think the only way to do artist housing is that other people in the community don't feel like artists are taking affordable housing away from people. And I think that we're actually working on a project with the BHA at the moment, and I do think this cross-subsidy of co-location of housing and culture in a city like Boston, or where it's landlocked and it's waterlocked, is going to be really critical in saying it's not artists or affordable housing, it's both. And we can invent 290 North Beacon, which is a really important project that again is got funding from MOAC and working with the BHA. As far as I can tell, there's no comparable project to that in America. And I think that is the bit that I think is interesting about Boston, is that the constraints and the challenges might lead to us inventing things that don't exist elsewhere to deal with our problem. And I'm super optimistic that we have the people. We could probably build this building if we just had everyone on this stage.
Yep.
How many cities you randomly allow a bunch of people and go, we could build a music rehearsal public housing scheme on this stage. And I think there's an optimism there about human creativity is, and we're going to be people that advocate for the creative economy. We have to assume that we can solve the creative challenges that we are faced with as well at the same time. And I think we can show that by demonstrating these models. And if we don't build it, Amy's going to shower me in the Charles.
But I want to answer your question. So, and also something, community development corporations is not something that any of us have talked about tonight. That can be a huge partner that goes across for-profit, nonprofit, community, government, all of it. And also, thank you for your help in this building, and thank you for your help with 80 Border Street. For people who may not know, 80 Border Street is a community of artist workspaces and galleries and some other small businesses, etc. That's affordable artist workspace. Exactly. Owned and operated by the CDC, East Boston. I think you can't answer live work or work. There's need for both. And I'm going to say it on the works. I'm mostly for work because there are some places where you just need to be loud for all kinds of music, right? No matter how much reinforcement you have, or unless you're like, or you have to have many people and a lot of space to do stuff. Another thing about work is that depending on the kind of art you're making, you were just talking about culinary stuff. In Alston, we have a project where there's a guy that is a glass maker. And there's people that are like using chemicals or, and those need to be in commercial buildings, not in residential buildings. And so that's a whole other thing. There is a value for artists live work, but I'm gonna tell you a story about, we always ask artists about what would happen if you lost your space. The first thing they say is, I will make smaller work. And what they mean is physically smaller, meaning like you look at some of the things here that are like big and giant, right? The scale at which you work would have to be smaller if it was in your home or live workspace. But what they're actually saying is smaller in idea, smaller in scope, smaller in imagination. The physical amount of physical space that you have is directly tied to the type of work and the imagination and the scope of practice that you can build. So I won't say one or the other, but there's one other value about these workspace communities that have many. The public can go to them, right? I mean, unless it's an artist live work community, let's say Midway Studios or the Lofts at Western Ave or Brick Bottom. They can have open studios too, and you can go into people's homes and see their work. But anyone if you have never gone to an open studios, please go. The season is about to begin. You couldn't even see everything in a whole day. You can buy stuff at cost directly from artists. You can see their process, but it's almost like it's free entertainment to go see what they're doing. And you can't really get that the same, I feel like, in an artist workspace, in an artist live workspace.
Thank you so much for
Sorry.
that. That's okay. So we want to leave a little bit of room and time for folks to be able to socialize a bit. Thank you all so much. This has been an amazing panel.
And thank you to our moderator. Thank you, Anita.
I'm going to pass it. Thank you all. I'm going to pass it to Catherine.